again. I was here last year. I see many familiar faces, people that were here last year, and other places too as well. So the way I'd like to start is to just begin by asking you to do something in terms of connecting with yourself. For me, I think this is a very important place to start when there are gatherings like this. What I would like you all to do, eyes open or eyes closed, is I'd like you to get in touch with whatever it was that brought you here. In other words, there was an impetus, an impulse, a desire, a need or needs that you were wanting to get met. But more than just existing in your head as an idea or as a thought, see if you can get in touch with that impulse as it lives in you, in your heart, or in the feeling place. That a sense of a dream or a vision, whatever that is, that whatever it is, the quality it is that you want to enrich or to deepen or learn, I'd like to take just a few moments of silence for each of you to get in touch with that, just to begin with that. So I know it helps me if I just breathe deeply. So just take a few moments and do at whatever your pace is, in whatever way you can more connect to yourself. That desire, that vision, that goal, the impulse that brought you here. Thank you. Just want you to notice what it feels like inside, in your body, in your emotionality. The place that I asked you to get in touch with is very similar to, or the same as, this place that is, for me, the heart of nonviolent communication. It's where our needs reside, in our heart. For me, the quality of needs reside more than just a kind of psychological structure that we use to communicate with and to exchange meaning and to connect with. It's something that goes deep into our heart, life moving through us, seeking fulfillment. So that piece is really important to at least become conscious of at the beginning. So I'd love to hear from maybe 3 or 4 people who would be willing to share what your experience was, just so I can connect with you, just with that little exercise.
When you find your place, the practice begins.
So you experience that as a way of beginning your practice. Yeah, thank you.
3 kind of qualities came forward for me. One was first a kind of embodied joy, and then the second was an embodiment of love, and the third was of freedom.
Thank you.
For me, the intention came to want to deepen and integrate my understanding of NVC and my practice of it into a deeper spiritual context.
Thank you. Yes.
what I connected with was this sense that speech has been a big source of suffering for myself and other people,
Yeah.
and unnecessarily, and that if I can somehow use that in a way that doesn't cause suffering, I'm going to be happier, and the people
Yeah.
around me are going to be happier.
So a sense of something in you that desires or wants to live in a different way without suffering, connect with human beings in a way that's more fulfilling, maybe. Yeah, great. Thank you. Yes.
This was an invitation into community.
Great, thank you. So this place that I invited you to touch, and I'm imagining that there are varying levels of in touchness or whatever each of you experienced. For me, this is the heart of NVC, this very part. So for me, nonviolent communication is not a formula or a technique, or even more than simply a communication process. It's often been described as a language of the heart. And the part that I emphasize, that I find the value in, is that if we're going to actually have a language of the heart, a language of deep authenticity, we need to be able to contact and access the heart and the authenticity before we're able to live it and communicate it. And so this part of the work is the part that I found the most valuable. What I'd like to do is before we get into the heart of it, just deal with sort of the overview of the 2 days, the schedule, and the general focus I'm going to have for day 1 and day 2. My understanding is the schedule that was advertised was about 10 to around 5. Is that your understanding? Yes. And I'd like to leave it open for if there's a lot going on around 5, to maybe extend it a little bit longer so we have any sense of completion. I'm wondering if anybody has any appointments that you wanted to keep that would prevent you from being here a little longer. You would need to leave? Okay.
Not right at 5. but
Yeah,
maybe
close
about
to it.
35,
Okay.
30.
Great.
I might be able to adjust that also as we get closer.
Yeah.
It looks like we might, I could make a call and adjust it.
Okay, great, good. I also wanted to get a kind of temperature read for the level of experience in the room. I'm wondering how many people that NVC is like brand new for you. Okay, you haven't had any exposure at all to it. Raise your hand. Okay, no exposure, okay. And those of you who've had a little bit of exposure, but it's still relatively new. Okay, great. And the rest, I'm assuming you've been involved with workshops and practice groups for either months or years. Is that accurate? Okay. At some point during the workshop, I'm going to ask. We're going to work probably in pairs or small groups, and I think it works better if those of you who've had more experience can pair up or work with people who've had less experience. It helps the learning a little bit more. So just want to say a little bit about this because it's a challenge to offer a process wherein there's different levels of experience and different levels of learning needs of somebody who's brand new. Life, alienating thinking and language, the kind of thinking and language that carries judgments and criticisms and disconnects us from other human beings, and how we can apply a language that is different from that, how we can learn to translate our experience, our thinking and our language from that kind of judgmental or critical or labeling, etc. language into a language that's more authentic, into something that connects us to our feelings and needs. So there's a whole process around learning that. And there's a certain sort of skill set that's involved in that stage of learning. Distinctions around what thinking is and what feeling is, distinctions around what an observation is, and the evaluations that we mix up with our observations. And those are very important elements in that first stage of learning. I'm not going to focus on that because this is not a beginning workshop. But I am going to focus on what I would call the second stage, which is also, it's not sequential in the sense that in order for you to benefit from this, that you have to have that first stage necessarily in order to understand the second stage. Because the second stage I consider to be actually essential in a way that the first stage doesn't necessarily address. And it's the internal awareness of self. It's that internal awareness of that kind of thinking and language and inner judgment that blocks us, that prevents us from having that authentic experience awareness in the first place so that we can communicate it. So I want to acknowledge that. So for those of you who are beginning, aren't going to expect the basics and the skills. I think that this, what I'm going to be offering this weekend I think you'll find it valuable and enriching. But I don't want you to walk away thinking that I'm not addressing that level of learning in a way that's, well, I am not going to be addressing it necessarily per se, but that you're not going to have the expectation not being met around that. So I'm trusting that that what I'm offering is really essential and really valuable, and that it can set the stage for your continuing to follow and learn the basic concepts and the skills around NVC. So, any question about that, or any comment or response? I will make reference a lot of the time to some of the basic construct, the model, the understanding that's required in order to integrate and learn this process and begin to apply it to ourselves and to other people. And I do invite questions if there's some things that I'm saying that aren't clear to you and you want further clarification from anybody. So I want to say something about the second stage. And this isn't really clearly delineated, you know, like you could get your master's and then get your Ph.D. and you have to do this kind of content and then you learn this other content. The heart of nonviolent communication has very little to do with information, has very little to do with content, really has more to do with how we learn how to redirect our internal experience from what we have been educated in, how we learn how to characterize and make sense of, interpret our life experience into a different model, a different frame. And so more of this has to do with the reorientation of our learning, and not necessarily is it primarily conceptual or does it carry information, although that's a part of it. So over the years I want to address the second stage. In my experience of teaching NVC, the first stage of learning where people first come across nonviolent communication, as those of you who have been around for a while, invariably people have found transformative. It's been life-changing for people to be able to shift their perspective from one in which there's been a primary focus on judging or criticizing, or at least in some or most of the relationships, and with respect to themselves also, self-judgment. To be able to find a way to non-judgmentally shift and experience our humanity and the other person's humanity in a way that frees us from the constrictive experience of those kinds of judgments. So that first level has been invariably transformative for people. And what I also found was along the way of practicing this process, even though, I'm making these broad general statements I want you to understand, and it's not black and white or absolute, is that invariably, and I would say almost invariably, down to the individual, but it varies within each individual, that even though there has been a learning and an integration of the basic skills and consciousness of nonviolent communication, there have been times where the skills are not accessible, where you get people who got so triggered and so stimulated into fear or anger that even though they've learned for months and even years how to integrate the skills in the consciousness and to apply them in many life situations. They're not able to do it. Does that resonate with anybody?
Oh, yes.
And so this is something I found years ago. And when I first, it happened and it built, and I go, what is going on here? You know the skills, you know the consciousness. When you share it with me or someone else, I'm able to feed it back or empathize and connect. Yes, those are your feelings, those are your needs. Why were you not able to access it on your own? Curious. I didn't mean that as a judgment at all. A real curiosity. And what I found was invariably is that there is a level of internal experiencing, internal consciousness that I've come to regard as core belief structures, something that we deeply have embedded within each of us that primarily is connected from early traumatic experiences, early profound disconnections wherein conclusions or decisions about life have been come to, that under extreme duress or emotional stimulation or pain or fear, that gets reactivated. And when that level of fear or pain gets reactivated, something happens in the system. I think there's neurological and brain correlations with this. But within the system, something gets reactivated so that the only thing that the person can feel is that reactivated state. Fear, anger, something that the skills and the consciousness aren't able to access in that level of training. So over the years, that inner work has been something that I found really valuable, and it's been something that has been extremely important to me. And I've addressed a lot of the learning and the training, so to speak, of what I offer in that area. It's also offered some of the deepest levels of healing and transformation when people are able to access some of these fundamental core places around beliefs that we have about life, identifications and beliefs that we have about ourselves. To heal those levels accesses levels of internal liberation and freedom where we can have a more consistent level of access to that. So this is a very important point I wanted to get across, so that my intention is that you have an understanding of the context within which of the stuff that I'm going to be sharing. Any response to that?
That's exactly what I needed this weekend.
Yeah? Great.
Robert,
Yes.
have you ever worked with EMDR in connection with NVC?
I haven't, but I have a friend who has. Yeah, and it touches into some of the similar territory. Okay. So, yes.
You were talking about the core beliefs being kind of the interfering thing.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I just wanted to comment that I think it's actually sometimes just the nervous system. You know,
Well-
with when you get into the fight or flight,
Yeah.
the limbic brain it's just meant to go faster than the neocortex, and so
Right.
sometimes there's not really a lot of that part of the self online,
Right.
because it's so much just survival instinct.
I agree, and my experience is that those are correlated with core beliefs. They aren't separate. So on the limbic neurological system, that's that level of consciousness, but what correlates with that in terms of the mind are the core beliefs that are correlated. So it isn't either or for me. My understanding is that it's both, and they're inextricably related with one another. But I think that's really important to acknowledge, that when we get the limbic system re-stimulated in us, this fight or flight or freeze, then something physiologically happens that where it's actually almost physically impossible to access some level of awareness. Whereas when we're not re-stimulated or reactivated in that way, we can access it with ease because we don't have that fight or flight or freeze reactivated. So my experience is that there is a way to heal that that physiologically grounded, limbic system grounded sort of constrictive patterns. We can enter into that consciously and heal that. So there's probably other methods, but the approach that I'm going to be offering today around self-compassion and compassionately embracing that inner experience is one entryway into that. Yes?
When I hear you speak about that, and I'm a little familiar with that work since I have worked with that with you and Susan, what comes to mind to me is, it seems like with what's happening in the world today, there's more and more people that are at a breaking point where that goes in. So the guy who lost his job and goes and shoots a bunch of people in Florida, the guy at the military base, who knows what was happening for him. And so I really just wanted to say how much I value this work, because I think it really is affecting people a lot.
Yeah, on those extreme levels, I agree, it's affecting people a lot, but it's also affecting people on an everyday level as well, you know, when you get reactivated and your partner says, yeah, please NVC me for right now instead of yelling at me or something. You know, where are your feelings and needs? That kind of thing. I'm curious, for anybody, what I shared right now, for particularly those people who are beginning and new, do you have any questions or response? Because I really want this workshop to serve you, and I want you to be able to get value from this. So I'm wanting to know if there's anything that I shared, if there's any questions or unease or lack of clarity from anyone? Okay.
Robert, I have an appreciation, because if I heard you correctly, you're saying even if the fight, flight, freeze shows up, and that's physiologically can block our access,
Yeah.
that there's a thought that preceded that, and we may
Yeah.
not have been aware of that thought, and at that level it can be healed.
Yeah.
That once I'm in a state where I don't have access to even self-connection, I just ride out that physiological response because I'm not able to
Yeah.
respond in a conscious way.
Yeah. I'm actually not sure that it's a thought that precedes it. I think there's a level of complexity internally that I don't think anybody is pretty clear. That when, my understanding, I'm not an expert on this, is that when there's a limbic system level of, neurological level of reactivity, there isn't a conscious thought. But embedded in that, we can access it through a conscious awareness that can actually transform that unconscious neurological, where we don't have conscious choice. We can transform it so that we access that deep place of constriction, whereas previously we were not able to access it. We can train ourselves. We can have a practice so that we can access it and have that not be at the effect of that. So that would be my understanding of it. Okay. So I'd love to get, I'm going to be sharing more information near the beginning to set the context. And today, I'm hoping to focus, my intention to focus is on a quality of self-compassion and self-care, which is for me the heart of being able to access our authentic feelings and our needs. Tomorrow, I want to focus more on the dialogue, the authentic dialogue. So these two are the major dimensions of nonviolent communication, is the inner dimension and the relationship dimension. And so, let me see if I wanted to say more about that. So today I'd like to share some information. I want to start out with my understanding of what NVC consciousness is, and then move into some principles and a process around self-compassion and that inner process. I'd like to demonstrate the process with someone so you can all observe what that is like, and then create an opportunity for you all to practice the process in small groups. And then we'll see how that goes. I mean, that's pretty much my intention for the day, and it's a lot to cover. So you have a handout called NVC Consciousness. Is there an extra one around that I can make reference to, Kate? Oh, yeah. Thank you. So I'm wanting this not to be too theoretical, but I'm wanting to, I think the understanding of NVC consciousness, even if this NVC is not new to you, I'm thinking that this going over it, reviewing it would be valuable. I always start out with number one, is at the heart of this process are the universal human needs. And there's a distinction between the conventional use of the word need and how we need it at NVC. And I think that distinction is really important to understand if we're going to actually access and live the process of nonviolent communication. I'm just going to make reference to very quickly, I usually spend a lot more time on this part of it, but a couple of examples of the conventional use of the word need and how that's distinct from NVC needs is, there's usually associations that I call life alienating, that they constrict our experience of ourselves and they separate us when we communicate from this place. Needs are regarded as selfish, as immature or childish, or they're also often regarded as something you become attached to. Or people have beliefs that they don't have needs, and so they should be able to be self-reliant and not have needs in relationship to other people. Does that sound familiar to some of you? Yeah. Maybe one or two more. What are other associations you have with the word need that is perhaps limiting to your experience?
Weakness.
Weakness. Yeah, if you have needs, you're weak. I don't have to have needs. I'm a man or I'm an adult. Anyone else?
Neediness.
Neediness. Yeah. There's somebody walking down the street. They're needy. What do? Cross the street. Don't want to meet anybody that's needy. Unless you have that internal counterpart that where your self-significance is based on meeting other people's needs all the time. So, there's a number of associations. One of them is the way the word need is used often, where it says, you need to do this, or I need to go to the store to buy this, or you know what you need. When the word need is used in that way, there's the distinction that NVC makes is the difference between need, or an internal value that lives in us, and the action or the strategy that we take to meet that need. So that use of the word need goes to that distinction. So in NVC, we don't mean the word need as an action or as a behavior or pointing to a thing, like I need to have an ice cream cone or I need to have sex with you. That's an action. So in NVC, the distinction that we make is a need is an internal value. It's qualitative. It's not an action, but it's imbued in actions. So that if I have a conversation with you, I have a need, perhaps, for understanding. I want to be seen accurately. And the action that I might request in order for me to experience that qualitative value is, I might ask you can you share with me what you're hearing me say? I might ask you to tell me what your understanding is, so that I want to make sure that I'm being understood. Or I might say I have a need for closeness and intimacy. And I may ask a friend or an intimate partner, could you spend some time with me this evening? Just let's spend some time talking and holding each other, or some other action that would meet the qualitative need or value. So there's that distinction between the action or the behavior and the actual qualitative value or need that is met by that action. So that's another distinction that's important when we start talking about needs in NVC.
So the needs are universal human qualities.
The premise is that all human beings have the same needs.
Okay, that's actually where I was going, because in a particular situation, one person's needs may be different than someone else's.
And that's very often the case, that in particular situations, one person's need is different from another's.
And I guess my question, is it useful to even understand or delve into why someone's, in this particular situation, that need's coming forward, or do you just...
Well, that's part of the communication process, so I would say, yes, it is useful is that if I'm connecting with you, I want to communicate with you, you have a different need than I do. Let's just say we have a friendship relationship, and you have a need for friendship and companionship, and you ask me to go to the movies with you, or go to do something. And I have a need, because I've had a long day of work, I have a need for rest, and perhaps peace that would be met by being alone or reading my book. We have different needs. So I would want to ask you, what gives rise to your need? And you would ask me, what gives rise to my need? So that in that communication, instead of judging each other and me saying, you don't care about me, all you want to do is, do that kind of stuff, and I would be able to come to a full understanding of your needs and value them. And the intention would be for you to receive and hear what my need and value is in this, and value that. Out of that meeting is the heart of what we call connection in nonviolent communication, is that we can come to a place where we value each other's need and not take it personally. If a person wants to meet their need instead of contribute to ours. So, yes.
I have one thing that came up in a Marshall workshop that I just wanted to ask you now.
Yes.
Because it's a good example right there. Somewhere inside of me, what's come up is that, at least to a certain extent, there's a hierarchy to needs. In your example, what I've come up with in it is that perhaps a universal need that we all share is that need for connection. That if you're willing to take a moment and listen to his need, to the fulfillment of it, to go to the movies together, just to be present for that. If he's willing to take a moment just to be present with you, to hear, not just with the ears, but with the heart, your need to have some peace to lay in bed, there's a certain healing that happens in there, which, for lack of a better way to describe it, is a higher need being fulfilled, which is rewarding, which somehow takes precedence over, or somehow makes the other one not need to be fulfilled so much.
Yes, yes.
Either your need to be by yourself or his need to be with you. That other one being fulfilled makes an opening that anything can happen on those other two, and it becomes much less important.
I agree. I would use different language to characterize it, but the essence of what you're saying, I agree with.
Maybe you can repeat it back in your language, because I don't really have the language.
I think you have the essence of it, and that's what's important. But what I would say is that given what the objective of nonviolent communication is, it's always connection. So no matter what the other needs are, just say in life situations, in our relationship as life goes on, we have needs with respect to life. In this case, the example I was giving, in our friendship, he had a need for companionship and wanted to spend time with me. I had a need in my life for rest because I was tired and I was needing rest and peace. Now those are needs that we have, that we bring to the connection. But in that moment when we're communicating, the most important need is connection. So I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
And for me, in any dialogue, that is always the highest need, because that's the intention, that is the objective of communicating. As opposed to how we have learned, is that we haven't learned, most of us, to have an intention to connect and truly understand the other person's needs and values so that we can value them as much as we do ours. What we've learned how to focus on is the outcome. And if we don't get the outcome that we want, we have a reaction. And it's usually in some form of self-judgment or other judgment or some kind of critical, life-alienating language. So I'm in agreement with you, and that's, it's essentially, it's the same, I just had a slightly different way of articulating it. So there's always, in nonviolent communication, in the dialogue, our intention is to connect, not to seek the outcome. And this, I think, my observation has been one of the primary challenges in this process, is because when we want something, when something is up, when something is important, we have an important need in relationship to one another, we usually want something different. We want different behavior. We want to change it. And that means outcome, rather than simply connect with the other person so that I'm conveying to you what my need and value is, and I hear what yours is. And that is the objective. That's not easy to change, that habitual pattern to want to change things and make things different and fix it, or some version of that. So I'd like to proceed with the NVC consciousness. I started with number 1, because in NVC, there's so many different ways to express it. But the needs that we talk about are a form of a basic life impulse flowing through us, seeking fulfillment. Basic life impulse, life energy, moving through each human being seeking fulfillment. And these express themselves in different situations, in different contexts, because each situation may have a different meaning for a person. For example, I may be communicating and I really want to be understood. Or I may be working on a project and engage you for cooperation, and I may have a need for cooperation and support. Or I may be, with respect to myself, in my own life, I want to be able to live according to my own value system and have a need for integrity. So each life situation carries its own set of need or needs or inner values. But it all, for me, my understanding is that all carries with it, underneath it, is a basic sense of life wanting to fulfill itself within us. So that, for me, is one of the most important sort of foundations of nonviolent communication. And this quality of life is something that is not just something we hold in our head as an idea or a belief that we learn from the culture. It's something that exists in each human being in the heart, in the human heart. It's what we deeply value as human beings that come from the authentic heart. And it's something that we can feel when we have a need fulfilled. We feel it in our body. We feel the sense of emotional and actually the physical energy of a need being fulfilled. So let me just ask you all, just for a really short experiment, can you each think of a situation, a life experience recently, where something happened that you enjoyed it? It's another way of saying you had a need fulfilled or met. And it doesn't have to be a big thing. Just ask each of you for a moment. Something that worked for you. Something where a need was met. And if you can identify that value or need, I think that's even more connected. So just take a moment to connect with that. So, quick experiment. In your experience of remembering that or recalling that, I would frame that in terms of NVC is that a need or needs were met. So notice how you feel in your body when you recall that experience. Notice the feeling, the emotional feeling in your heart or in your solar plexus. What does that feel like? Anybody? Yes?
Can you smile?
Smile. Okay. Over here?
I said release.
Release.
And it just felt release, relaxing.
Relaxing, yeah.
Calmness, peace.
Peace, fullness. Okay. And it's actually an energy that you feel, correct? You feel it in your body and in your emotion. Back here? Yes.
Yeah, I didn't feel it this time, but my first experience of MVC a month or so ago, after this little bit of process, I just felt this whole flush in my body.
Yeah.
And it's what I've always wanted in communication.